This is pre-calculus video on section 3.2. The name of the section is graphs of functions. The name of this notes is vertical line test. Before we get into vertical line test, I just want to talk to you a few minutes about what it means to define a function by a graph. Most of the time, in your experiences in the past, you've seen functions that have been defined by an algebraic expression or an algebraic equation. But that's not the only way to define a function. One other way that you can define a function is by the graph. And when you're given the graph, every point that lies on the graph has an x-coordinate and a y-coordinate, where the x-coordinate is the input or the domain, the y-coordinate is the output or the range. So these questions over here are kind of some ways to help you through understanding how to analyze a graph and determine things about it as a function. The first question here, A, what's f of 0? So what I want to do is I want to look at the x-axis for 0, and I'm going to find a place on the graph where I've got a point whose x-coordinate is 0. I'm trying to make a dot there. All right, so if I think about this point where the x-coordinate was 0, I want to find out what the y-coordinate is. And the y-coordinate of that point will be the output, will be the output. So when the input is 0, the output is -1 because that's the y-coordinate of that dot. If I take a look at f of 2, I've got two different places where the x-coordinate is 0, okay? But I just covered it up. Let me kind of erase that. But this one here has a hole in it, which means that the graph continues up until that point, but does not include that point. Whereas the one at 2, 2, the one that I've still left green, that one was a black dot, which indicated that point is included in the graph. So when the output was 2, when the input was x equals 2, the output is 2. All right, the domain. So what we're going to do is look at all of the x-coordinates that lie on this graph, and for the range we want to look at the y-coordinates. All right. So I'm going to start from the left. This arrow that indicates on the left it continues forever is going to tell me that the graph is continuing all the way to the left to -infinity. Okay. It continues from that point to the right until we get to x equals 2, and then it stops, all right? It's discontinuous there, but it does pick up at x equals 2 again, and it continues to the right until we get to x equals 5, and then it stops. So the domain of this function is all real numbers. Okay. The domain is the real numbers from -infinity to 5. And since there's a solid black dot at 5, we're going to put a square parentheses there. The range are the y-coordinates. All right, and let me erase this. I'm going to do this in purple now. Okay, so we're going now from bottom to top. So it looks like, oops, purple. Okay, so it looks like I've got my y-coordinate here is -4. Okay, there's nothing below -4. So -4 is the smallest number that y can be. It goes up continuously forever to all infinity here. Okay, there's also some y's that are equal to 2 over here, but that's okay, they're already covered on this graph. Okay, So my y coordinates, the range, are all real numbers from -4, and I should make that a square bracket because the graph did touch that point, up through positive infinity. All right, now we'll go on to vertical line test. All right, the vertical line test is a way to look at a graph and determine if the graph represents a function or if it's a relation. And so you've done this before. If you can draw any line through the graph that intersects the graph more than once, did I say line? I meant vertical line. If you can draw any vertical line on the graph that intersects the graph more than once, then the relation is not a function. So if I were to draw a vertical line here, it only intersects once. If I were to draw a vertical line here, it only intersects once. So no matter where I draw a vertical line in the first graph, the line only intersects once. So this is a function. Okay. Now, in my second graph, if I draw a vertical line, it intersects twice with the graph. And so that means this is not a function. All right, this concludes the first video in section 3.2.